They do, yes. But not seats itself. They're saying they're just going to build parking. What do you need more parking for? Why would they push it one more parking when you can sell it?
You could still average the price.
He's on it, you know? I just don't get it. Yeah. Yeah, we raised a Polish flag a couple of days ago here with the big show costs and the people and some of the old ladies, I guess, were near there when they were taking the organ out. But hey, Mary. How are you? Good, how are you? I saw you from a distance last night, too. I think I saw you like 3 or 4 days in the last couple of days.
But that is over the most guaranteed.
Good, how are you? See you. Week number 2? Yeah.
Okay, how are you?
Good. Thanks for last night.
Yeah, nice event.
Yeah, glad you could make it out. So.
Yeah, I'm glad I could too. I'm glad I did. Good to have a couple of mayors. That was nice of the mayor of Brockton to drive all the way down. He wasn't even speaking or anything.
Right, and didn't want to.
Yeah, because when he came up a couple hours earlier, I thought, oh, he must be coming. He must be a featured speaker or something. And he's like, no, I'm just coming.
He leaves it. Kathy Smith, their superintendent, is really amazing.
She was good. Yeah,
I mean,
she was really eloquent. And
she's probably one of the best I've met in the state.
Yeah, no, your remarks were great
The woman
too.
from Worcester is
Relatively new.
she's new, but she's another been around forever. Was there because the district needed someone to heal them, but isn't a long-term person.
Yeah. Well, the Brockton person's been there forever, but she seems like
but she's a lawyer. Like she's a different path.
Yeah.
I mean, she's very bright though. She does a lot of stuff like that.
How did Anthony and Steve do?
Good. I mean, Steve didn't go in as prepared because he didn't originally. It wasn't going to be all the superintendent sitting up there. It was the business people, so then he had to put stuff together. But they were fine. I mean, at a certain point, it's just the same thing being said over and over.
Hey, Rosalie, how are you? Good.
And even Colin
Glad Joe
from
was there.
Chickadee. Yeah, I just talked to Joe about it. That was good that he came out.
Get more counselors, but you know, he's the only one that goes to every committee meeting. He's the only one that we have an absent counsel for the most part.
Yeah.
They show up to their meetings. They know nothing that happened in committee. And
Begging someone to join the school building committee for a year. And no one
they started, Joe, I think at the last time, they had to tell Joe, like, they were all upset that they don't know anything about the project. And he was like, well,
show up.
and Joe was like, well, Todd makes the impression that he's been going.
It's that thing, like, do you want something, like, do you want them there now?
I don't want her there.
Because she was been really negative at them when she was there, but it's just like she's the like this is going to be in her lap in a few months.
Yep.
Good. How are you?
What's going on?
We were just talking about last night. I thought it was good. Yeah. I was saying Kathy Smith. Yeah. She is amazing.
Well,
I mean, this is a road show, but I mean,
she does this as a
yeah.
I mean, like, she wants her legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Become the new Tom Scott at some point. A lot of people jockeying for that. The new Tom Scott. He's the executive director of the Superintendent's Association. Yeah. I don't think so. But there's a lot of people that want that. That's good. It's great good. That's the first I've ever seen at night. Yeah, he just keeps it going.
There you go.
Michael, you can do whatever you want.
or show and tell with 100-year-old pipes. We're going to call this meeting to order. My name is Joe McGivern. I'm the chairman of the Holyoke City Council Finance Subcommittee. To my left is Peter Tallman, Councilor at Large. To my right is Mike Sullivan, Councilor at Large. In a little bit, Jim Leahy and Todd McGee, our president, will be joining us, and hopefully a few other city councilors. Before we get into, which is the devotion of this meeting tonight, the middle school issue, we're going to clear up a little business, so if you could just bear with us. Chair will entertain a motion to go out of order to take up item number 6.
So moved to take up item number 6.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item 6 is the amount is in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53A. The City Council hereby accepts the provisions of the Complete Streets Construction Grant, authorizing the establishment of a fund and or other method appropriate for the accounting of the receipts and expenditures of all resources associated with the administration of said grant. On the motion to take off the table for discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? With us is our Mike McManus, our superintendent of the DPW, to give us an explanation and answer our questions.
Okay, so the Complete Streets program, it's, the city's passed the Complete Street Ordinance back in 2016. And the goal of the ordinance is to create a connected network of right-of-way facilities accommodating all modes of travel. So it's pedestrian, bicycle, cars, buses, the whole gamut of travel. Passing the ordinance allowed us to come up with a prioritization plan, which we submitted to DOT. It included 22 different projects within the city for different types of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And then once we have the prioritization plan, every year we can submit for project funding. And DOT will fund up to $400,000 in a community of projects that are on the prioritization plan. So we submitted 8 projects for this first year, and it was approved. The total value of the grant is $389,819. It's a pure grant similar to the Chapter 90 money. There's no required match. So once the grant is accepted, we can go out to bid and start constructing some of the projects. And the projects include the rapid flashing beacons on Hampden Street near the Stop and Shop, and other pedestrian improvements throughout the city, some at Rowan Park, bike improvements in the downtown and Flats neighborhoods, and also up by HCC, crosswalk painting throughout the town. Some improvements to the Dwight Street, Pleasant Street, and Appleton Street intersection by Auntie's Market. There's a triangle there that's not very safe for pedestrians, and we're going to reconfigure the geometry of that intersection. There's the HCC pedestrian improvements across Homestead Avenue that Councilor Bartley was talking about at the last meeting, is the 8th project on the list that we have.
Mike, on the communication, you, separate from this, but did refer to us, it lists all 22 projects. You don't have a cross-reference numbers for each of those 8, do you?
They're the first 8.
First 8, okay. So is this 22 prioritized?
Yes and no. We can pick and choose. We don't have to stick to the order that's in the plan.
And
This
further-
is also a way that we can do sidewalk improvements outside of the CDBG area and also outside of Chapter 90 funding in future years.
Is this an annual grant, or is this a one-time deal?
It's annual. It is a competitive grant, so we will be competing against other communities within the Commonwealth. So we're not guaranteed $400,000 every year. The prioritization plan is a 5-year plan, so we're committed to these projects for the next 5 years. After that, we can develop a new prioritization plan, which would include some projects that didn't get constructed over the last 5 years, and also new projects that have come up.
And just out of curiosity, how is our Chapter 90's allotment doing?
We received another $1 million this year. It was essentially level funded. It went down slightly from the previous year, but not by a lot.
I remember the days when it was $1 million a quarter. Any questions for our superintendent? Councilor Tallman.
Thank you, Mike. A question on the, once you put these out to bid, what is the approximate time frame for the project to get started and completed?
So each project is treated as an individual project. And, you know, we're coming into winter. So I see most of these projects happening next spring and summer. There is a requirement that we have the work completed by the end of September in 2019. But I don't see that as a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to accept the grant?
Motion made second to accept and recommend to the full city council next week to approve the grant and the appropriation and administration of said grant as appropriate. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone here who is not here for the middle schools? And it's unanimous. The chair will entertain a motion to proceed out of order to items 7, 8, and 9, and 10.
10. Make a motion to take up items 7, 8, 9, and 10.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. This is a second meeting, a revisit for anyone who wasn't here or not aware of 2 weeks ago, where we met with a number of officials, most who are, I think all who are present this evening, to talk about the status of an approved one middle school, new middle school for the city of Holyoke, and a proposal to make it an additional 2 middle schools. 2 weeks ago, we went through and got caught up on the conceptual, or probably beyond conceptual, design, location, purposes, and arguments for why the need for 2 middle schools. We talked about a number of things that are related to that. We received a lot of information which was passed on to our colleagues, and tonight is the second step where I think, unless we want to rehash some of what's before us or what is in the proposal, but is the second step of talking about the financing of the project. And that's, I think, has to be divided somewhat. Before us this evening for a vote, which could take place as early as next week, is an order for a transfer of $390,000. That money would be used for the addition of the second middle school, if we do that. And that would be for design, architectural design, preparing and getting ready for a final proposal, which would solidify both that and location at this time. In order, I think, to have that conversation, we do have to talk about the big picture, and that's how we're going to finance both projects. There are alternate options in front of us, things that we need to discuss, and if we do, and if the city council agrees with the presentation, if we do go to the 2 middle schools, then I think we should have at least an idea of how we're going to finance it. So with that in mind, to the members of the committee, are there any questions or thoughts? Okay. Does anybody feel we have to rehash the proposal itself? Mayor, I know you're fully aware of it, and I think we went through with Margaret Woods, construction, it's a little bit of everything. I think we're in good shape there. So if we could, Mayor, do you want to take the lead on the appropriation transfer? And this is a subcommittee, so if anybody wishes to speak, please just come forward and just, let us know your name. And right now we want to get through the financial part of this and hopefully the next step towards this project. Thank you, Mayor.
Yep, no, thank you, Counselor, and thank you to your colleagues as well for being here tonight. And I'm hopeful that other counselors will be here tonight, and if not, get updates from the three of you and or watch the video from tonight's meeting and the last meeting. I thought was very informative.
The mayor is telling us, everybody that's here this evening, we are taped, and we are live. We're on TV, so keep your best smiles on in the audience, and whatever you say is being recorded.
So tonight officially before the Finance Committee is a $380,000 request, and just to put that in reference, the City Council has already approved around $800,000 towards this project through a municipal bond that is reimbursable by MSBA, and so essentially, since that time, the entire team has worked diligently with MSBA to get approval for two brand new middle schools in Holyoke simultaneously. This is pretty unprecedented for the MSBA to support construction of two middle schools at the same time. This is certainly a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity for our community. We haven't had a new school in the city since 1989, so nearly 30 years. And so it's long overdue that we get this investment in the city of Holyoke. And this is also an investment that will touch every single young person and student in the Holyoke Public Schools. Every student in the city will go through one of these middle schools. And the team has been working really hard in the design phases. And so both middle schools, which you probably learned a couple of weeks ago, are relatively the same design. The PEC site for the second middle school is just sort of twisted around a bit to accommodate the grading issues and the site, the differences in the site there. So tonight's vote is basically to move forward to the next phase of schematic design. And I will point out that regardless of how the city chooses to move forward with the financing of the entire school project, that's not on the committee's jacket tonight for a vote. But to Councilor McGivern's point, I think the council wants an idea as to how down the road that we as a city plan to make this project happen. So tonight's vote, either way, regardless as to how we proceed to fund the actual construction of the projects, tonight is needed to make sure that our team can move forward with the official schematic design to put together a final proposal to get the final approval from the MSBA in February. And so this is why tonight is an important milestone, and we hope that we'll have a great conversation as to the importance of this and before the City Council next Tuesday night as well. In terms of the funding of the project, our expectation and hope is that given the investment here, we think it's worthy of a debt exclusion vote before the taxpayers and the voters of the city. We've talked about that with the school building committee we have here in the city. We've talked about it internally with the finance team here at City Hall. We've seen how other communities have handled investments of this size across the Commonwealth, and we feel that it's the best way forward for us to be able to fund these two middle schools at the same time in our community. So I will, for Tuesday's meeting, have a communication submitted to the entire City Council that outlines the process. If we were to go down that road in terms of what the City Council's obligation is to put a debt exclusion vote before the voters of the city. There is no requirement that the state or Secretary of State's office get involved or approve that. It's not a home rule petition. By 2/3 majority vote of the City Council, a debt exclusion vote can be placed on the ballot for municipal voters to vote on. Conceptually, in terms of the timing of the project, we were thinking of a special election date in late April, potentially April 30th, but those details are yet to be decided, obviously in coordination and collaboration with the legislative branch, all of you. So that is the thought as to how we move forward from here. But again, the question before us tonight is making sure our team can move forward with the schematic design to have all of the information we need to move forward and put a final submittal before the MSBA.
Mayor, one of the arguments we heard 2 weeks ago, which helped me in the debate of doing the second middle school, was, I believe Dr. Zreik, and I think Margaret also talked about, for purposes of affordability, 2 other schools would be closed. Now, Peck is somewhat used, but I believe the possibility of one school being closed, I don't want to put words in their mouths, could be Metcalf. Other schools could be taken offline or used for other school purposes. Are you up to speed on that? Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, and it was less than a year now that Dr. Zreik had worked with his team, and we had commissioned a report in regards to the potential for savings in central office and also the budget itself with consolidation of schools in the district. The number that I remember off the top of my head was potentially, budget savings of $45 million in terms of consolidation of students in different schools and the ability to close 2 different schools in the district. Also, separate from the savings in regards to operations of the district is the efficiencies that would be made in regards to actually planning, designing, and constructing 2 schools at the same time. And so if you had a scenario where they were staggered construction or a scenario where there were 2 different designs, that would significantly add to the cost and value of those projects. So I think, number one, it will result in budgetary operational savings, and number 2, it's a wise fiscal decision to do these 2 middle schools at the same time for a number of reasons.
Another question we asked, and you kind of knew the answer, but I think it's important because it's going to be asked a lot in the upcoming months here, is the demolition of Peck School. Those of us that lived or came upon, I wasn't around when Peck was built, but from the get-go, it was determined it was probably the poorest designed school in the country. And it doesn't suit a purpose, from what I'm told, for school use. But is there any other use for Peck School, so it doesn't have to be demolished, and we could take maybe the sale of the building for the purpose of helping pay for this project? Has that been explored at all?
I don't see an alternative use for that site. I do think it's given the zoning and larger, development view of that property, I think it's an appropriate area for a school in that neighborhood. I would predict issues with any other use there besides a school. Peck, as you stated, is very poorly designed. It's not conducive to learning or operations of a school. And I know there were around the planning process, there was, we did look into the possibility of would renovations be sufficient to make this a state-of-the-art middle school for all students. And we came to the conclusion that the delta in the prices and the cost of those projects weren't that far apart. And so even if we abandon that site altogether, and let's say the city wanted it as a potential economic development prospect, there's issues, number one, of parkland there, but also the cost of the city cleaning up that site itself would be significant. And so here's an opportunity for the city to demolish the site with reimbursement from the state, because we're using it for the actual site of new constructed middle school. Absent that, the city would be on the hook for renovations or making its site ready for development. That's not to say somebody couldn't take it as is. But again, when we look at the sites in the city in terms of equity in different neighborhoods, having a brand new middle school in the heart of Holyoke at the Lawrence site next to a beautiful, recently renovated public library and next to where a lot of our students actually reside, and then a school in a different part of the city, I think if we want to touch every single student, it's important that that site is still in the calculation for us.
We also learned that the population or expected population for each middle school would be about 1,100, and that they would be state-of-the-art. And certainly, I think we understand the arguments. We have not built a school in Holyoke since 1986?
89.
89. And that to me is just, I don't think there's any other community in the Commonwealth that has gone that long without building a new school. Now, Margaret, and we don't have our city's finance advisor here, although she did communicate with us through an email. Cinder has been with us since the late 80s, incredibly knowledgeable of all of our financial history and pretty much, I think, understands, since we were in deep trouble with fiscal year 1992, that we've done a lot of work on keeping the budget from growing and at the same time trying to provide needed services. One thing I learned 2 weeks ago, which is I think the next part of this conversation is very important to myself, is, and I don't want to put it in someone else's words, but the City of Holyoke is an 80%, gateway city, is an 80% reimbursement city, automatic. But when the MSBA calculates their construction formula, they cap it, and we're looking at getting 60, 58, 59, 60% reimbursement. I mean, that's one thing that's not easy to comprehend, understanding why we're 80% in our lowest income ratio of population in the entire Commonwealth. But two is that other communities that are not 80% can go above that cap by offering incentives or by meeting incentives. And we don't have the luxury of those same incentives because we're already 80%. And I stopped right there and said, but how can we be 80% if we're not getting 80%? They're calling us 80% and giving us 58, 59. There is something wrong right there. I cannot go forward until we get our questions answered on why we're not somewhere in the 70% range. And we need to do a battle on that. And we need to challenge the state. I sat with you last night, Mayor, in an incredible forum on Chapter 70 and what's happening with the, with the whole issue of reimbursements to the gateway cities, or should I say, not reimbursements to the gateway city. The City of Holyoke and all gateway cities did not create poverty. We service poverty. And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has to understand that everybody, including bedroom communities, have to help pay for those services, not just the people who live in the City of Holyoke. And I'm not lecturing you, Mayor, because I know you understand this. And I know you helped put that forum on last night. But these are two big hits financially to this city by the Commonwealth, by the state, that we have to take a stand, in my opinion, and we have to do it now, because we cannot let this go too far. This eventual either bonding or debt exclusion override is looking at projecting out to 20 years on the taxpayers' shoulders projects that we need. But we can't let the Commonwealth get away with this, and we can't wait for a lawsuit. I think we need answers now as to why our reimbursement, not the formula, but why we're being treated like this. Sorry, that was editorial.
And I agree with you, Counselor. It's something that we've talked about as a team. I had more of a 67% or so reimbursement, which is still below the 80%. I know it was explained to some extent a couple of weeks ago, but still, I happened to have a conversation in Boston a couple of weeks ago with Jennifer Pink from Pink & Company, who had also made me aware of some of the inequities between some of the more affluent communities and their ability to get above sometimes the reimbursement that are actually given to cities like Holyoke and other gateway cities. So I know the team is certainly prepared to work with the administration and work with our legislative delegation to get that information into the right hands and make sure that decision makers at the MSBA, our state treasurer, and others are well aware of the discrepancies here. But we certainly want to work as hard as we can to keep the burden on our taxpayers as low as we can moving forward. I would also point out to your point that we haven't had a new school in over 30 years, and I pointed out to the MSBA board subcommittee when I was in Boston I think it was in August, I can't remember. Yes, we were asking for two schools at the same time, which was unprecedented, but the cost of our two middle schools was still sometimes even a third of the cost of one new high school in the city of Boston that the MSBA had approved within the last year or so. And so just to give some perspective in terms of what the cost of providing a state-of-the-art middle school experience for every kid in the city of Holyoke is compared to just one school in the city of Boston or in some of the wealthier suburbs in the eastern part of the state.
We're going to obviously we're going to open up to committee questions, but I just want to mention two things. One, our president, Councilor McGee, who's also a member of the committee, has joined us. And we have several members of the the school committee with us this evening, which we always welcome their input and always welcome their knowledge of the issues that face our public schools. There's a number of people in the audience. I was afraid to invite everybody in for a seat because we run out of seats or you'd be behind us. But as we talk, if anybody who wishes to talk, please come in and don't be afraid to sit down or use the mic in front of us if you prefer just standing up. Members of the committee, any?
Yeah.
Councilor Sullivan.
Thanks. Mayor, why move right away to debt exclusion? Is there any other mechanisms or thought processes of other ways to fund it or afford these schools?
In my honest opinion, I think it's the only way to afford two brand new middle schools at the same time. And I think if we're going to move forward with any project, we do it in a way that's going to affect every student, so we don't have a system that's broken or unequal for some students based on where you live. When I had done some of the financial calculations with the team here in terms of what the bond request would be for the city and what the debt payments would look like, what it would add, for example, to our annual budget. So, I come in with the annual budget. I did a calculation as to, okay, we do this over 20 or 30 years. How much would this balloon the budget on an annual basis? And so what would our long-term debt or short-term debt payments be if we did the traditional route, which wasn't a debt exclusion, but just like every other bond request that came through, the fire trucks recently, parks we've done over the years. And looking at what that would add on an annual basis over the next 30 years, it made it look cost prohibitive. There would have to be some deep cuts elsewhere in the budget.
Well, what was that number?
It was at least $1 million a year. It would add to the city budget, but I can't quite remember if that was one school or two schools. But those are certainly calculations that we're going to be able to calculate.
Well, here's what going through it with the selection committee for here we go. Going through the selection committee, on the contractual side, contractor selection at risk and all this. One of the things I can't understand, the other schools we built, Holyoke High and Dean Tech, Holyoke High is nearly 50 years old, and you can jump right up and correct me if I'm wrong, Whitney, but it's in pretty good shape. It's had really good maintenance over the years. With continued maintenance like that, it'd probably be good for another 50 years. Is that a fair
Holyoke
statement?
High, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, mind you, there was a
Let me-
$20-something million renovation in 2010.
Right, but that's not nearly the cost of building new schools, and that's a renovation that happened, and then we've got the routine maintenance. But what I'm getting at here is I like the team that's been put together. Fontaine was selected. They built Holyoke High. It's still a very viable piece of real estate. They built Dean Tech. I think the same's true of Dean Tech. What I'm getting at here is, why are we looking at a bonding figure of 20 or 30 years? Why aren't we looking at a 50-year bond or a 100-year bond? Why are we putting all the burden on the taxpayers now? This is something I can see being spread out to the future, because the citizens of Holyoke are going to benefit from it for 50 years. Why are we trying to absorb the cost in 20 years?
I mean, that same question could be posed for almost any investment that the city makes today in our infrastructure or our green spaces or parks that we've invested in over time. I would also, just from an economic point of view, my first conclusion would be we end up paying a lot more money if we do a longer term, just in terms of interest rates and whatnot. So we would potentially be adding a burden to the taxpayers by, the longer we extend out a loan, the more we're going to be paying.
That's true, but right now, the yield curves on bonds are at historic lows. If they have to do, factoring in the time value of money, it's still not that bad a deal. Yeah, you'll pay a little more over the 50 years, but you'll have something in the budget that can be swallowed and handled much easier, and I think much, the public's gonna have, well, I don't know about the public, but right now, to me, the tax exclusion, as I understand it, would add $2.50 to the commercial tax rate. That, I think, would be the kiss of death for any new business at all. Holyoke, the business community is struggling. The business community doesn't get to vote on this. I still think it's a tough sale for the taxpayers, the homeowners and stuff already on their side, but add $2.50 to already the highest commercial rate in the state. Even if over the 50 years it's more money, I think it's something we need to explore more. And I think there's a few other unanswered questions I had for Dr. Sreich. If we're saving $4 or $5 million a year on the operating budgets, why wouldn't that? I know, part of it gets into the Chapter 70 stuff that becomes a nightmare, but some of that's just an energy savings. From what I understand about the PEC school, it's an energy sponge. It just the savings alone there might be enough to carry half the payments on one of the schools. And, as we go through, none of this is being factored. It doesn't seem into the budget. We're just going down the road here to this tax exclusion thing.
Yeah, and I agree with some of your points. I mean, overall, I don't think there's a more important investment we could make than in our public schools or education, and these things certainly will last long after we're here and last and affect generations to come in the city. I think when it comes to a debt exclusion, I think it's, we have all of the facts, all of the information, all of the numbers here, here's actually what the request is and what it would actually deliver for you, and that payment then disappears when the projects are then fully funded, and provide all the information necessary and leave it up to the taxpayers of the city to decide whether or not they think this is a worthwhile expenditure. If we do it the traditional route, it's only up to us, the elected officials, how we're spending taxpayers' money, whether they like it or not. We're putting it on our debt portfolio, and taxpayers are still paying for it. And so if we continue to balloon the city budget, then your conclusion about the commercial tax rate will continue to go up anyway. But I would argue in the long term, we're making our city a more competitive place for business. We have a more educated populace, more skilled workers. We have more young people staying in school. I believe in the people of Holyoke. I think the people of Holyoke will support a project like this. I mean, we just saw it be successful in a neighboring town of East Hampton to build a new school there. And we're seeing more communities move in this direction. So I, in my opinion, think it's the right way to go. But again, in a memo I provided the council on Tuesday, it's up to the legislative body to place this on the ballot. And we can move in that direction, and depending on the result, we could then talk internally about different scenarios, different lengths of time, traditional bonding, and what that would look like and what the impact would be.
Okay, well, we're still talking about putting it on a ballot when we haven't put out what the real numbers could be done out over 50 years, and some other scenarios that'll be worth a fight or a discussion, at least in council.
Oh yeah.
We're sitting on whatever 12 or 15 million right now in the stabilization fund.
And I would say we're not asking you to make any decision tonight, and I will make sure that no counselor has to make a decision without all of the information that they want or all of the questions that they want answered. And so that's still months away. And so I would encourage you and any counselor, any questions you have, concerns. Obviously we want an active counselor on the MSBA, the building committee, to be able to relay as much information as possible. But anyone in the administration, including myself, is able to provide information as quickly as possible. But we don't expect any counselor to have to make a decision feeling as if they don't have all the information before them. So we'll work hard to get that. But again, I would just remind that we're talking about the long term, but tonight it's about, in order to get to those calculations, we need to be able to move forward with the schematic design to be able to have a full picture of what this is going to cost and what the timeline is.
Absolutely. I mean, we didn't intend to just grill the mayor all night. But we can do that because we like to see him in here too often, John, you know? But again, I think do we have the entire school committee here? I mean, don't say it too loud because it's probably violating your open meeting law, but that's okay. It's good. The most important ones are here, Devin, right? Mayor, you said something about, and I just want to go back to that reimbursement because, Margaret, it's down to 58 and 59%. Everybody, this is Margaret Woods, who is, we could call you a lot of good things, but.
So, yes, so I'm Margaret Wood. I am the owner's project manager.
I don't think
Can you just,
hit the button. Was it?
I'm still Margaret Wood.
did you want to take a seat? Would you be better off, or?
No, this
You
is
good?
fine.
Okay.
So I am the owner's project manager. So I am sort of part of your team. And one of my roles here is to provide the district and the city with the estimated calculations of the project in order to start this discussion about how much these projects cost. So I met for the first time back in probably January with the mayor and some of his team, and we talked about, I brought up this issue that it is typical, actually standard, that the what we call in our office the effective reimbursement rate, like what the community really gets, is lower than the base reimbursement rate. And actually, I think it was noticeable when we were at when the MSBA voted on August 29th to sort of approve to schools going forward. Sean Cronin, who is the representative from Administration and Finance, who sits on the board, his comment to us as we went out of the room was, make sure that everyone knows that they will not get the full base reimbursement. So, I think for better or worse, I get to be the messenger about that. What I will say is that when you look at the statistics about how this looks statewide on projects that have been previously approved, the average of the what I'm going to call the effective reimbursement rate is around 17% less than the base. So that's looking at all communities and taking an average. I think we looked at the middle schools initially to come up with that. And so when I first met with the mayor, I said, we should be expecting that it's at least 17% lower than 80%, which I think is where we came up with the 67% number. In fact, and again, this is a legislative issue that, I definitely think needs to be fixed, but it is a legislative issue. In the legislation, there are incentive points that are available to communities. However, they are not available to communities with base reimbursement rates of 80%. It's not fair, but it's part of the legislation.
Could you give us a couple examples of what incentive points would be?
So I think that the two that spring to mind most easily there are incentive points for your maintenance plans for the building. So typically we see communities, I think 2 points in total are available, and the MSBA does an assessment, and then based on that, districts usually get somewhere between 1% and 2% of additional reimbursement. Another one is energy and sustainability performance. So if you go to a higher level than is the base requirement for the MSBA funding, you can get up to 2 additional points. So there are, I believe, 5 in total at this point. There used to be 6. So what you see is if you do an analysis of the communities, the same analysis of the communities that have a base reimbursement rate of 80%, they are lower. And on average, they are lower between 19 and 21%. And again, as Joe mentioned, what's driving this, there's several things driving it, but the biggest driver is that the MSBA does cap construction costs. And they do look at that number annually, and they have been raising it annually over several years. The current cap is $333 a square foot. So it's not possible right now to build a new building, or even do a major renovation for that cost. So the delta between what your project costs and the cap adds up to on every square foot. And that's, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the big number. That number then gets excluded from reimbursement. And they're actually doing an 80% reimbursement calculation, but they're only doing it on part of the cost of the project. To the mayor's point about escalation, for instance, one of the reasons that we think it is a good idea for the city to proceed with both projects together is that if you do the project in a staggered fashion, you're going to acquire escalation on the second project because you're starting it probably 1.5 years to 2 years later. We're estimating that number, if you started one project and finished it and then started the second one, we estimate that the value of that escalation is about $1.7 million. Because of the cap on construction, 100% of that escalation is borne by the community. So I hope that answers your question, Joe, but I think I want people to understand, first of all, this isn't something that is only a problem in Holyoke. We just, this last week, completed a project in Chelsea. The conditions were very similar. They had an 80% rate. Their effective reimbursement rate was about 20% lower. What really needs to happen, I think, is that the legislation needs to be changed so that communities who are at 80% can also get the reimbursement points, the incentive points, if their effective rate is below. But that's an issue for the legislators. So I don't think it's something we can solve here. And I don't think we can solve it in the time frame that this project suggests. I did bring a little schedule, but in general, I think of changing that kind of legislation as being a project that takes 1.5 years to 2 years. And remember, the clock is ticking on the escalation point. So do I think it needs to change? Absolutely. Do I think it's a good idea for us to get tangled up in changing it for this project? There's a cost associated with doing that. Mike?
Yeah, so this 389 that's before us, that's partially reimbursable? Is that flat out expense to city, or is that reimbursable?
So it should be 390.
It is 390.
$390. And yes, so the MSBA will reimburse you 80% on all of this work. We're really talking about the construction end of the project where this cap kicks in, and that's where you see the difference. But, I get to be the messenger. It's my job to make sure that you understand that and people aren't. It's not been uncommon historically for folks to get out ahead of this and talk publicly in the community about the base rate, and then people find out later it's different. So I'm just trying to get out there right at the very beginning and make sure people understand the ground rules.
So we're talking about a real cost to the city of the taxpayers, not 390,000, but of 78,000.
78, yeah. For this additional appropriation that we're seeking, yeah. Can I just add, I want to correct a couple things that came up here earlier. So the total number of students that both schools would serve
550.
is 1,100 students in total. So each school would be 550 students. And we did look at building, the cost of building one school for 1,100 students. And the building committee, although that is a slightly lower project cost, the building committee felt strongly that that was just too many kids for an urban school. And I know that Dr. Zweig feels strongly about that as well. And there was a desire to kind of make sure that there was more than one location, and then to ensure equity by making sure that the buildings were, really quite similar in the way that they were assembled, to the mayor's point earlier. The other thing I wanted to say is that the estimates of cost are based on a 30-year debt exclusion. So just to clarify, the term that Cinder initially calculated for us, which is not to say we shouldn't look at the other options, Mike, as you suggested, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that those numbers that were floated were for 30 years.
The demolition of Peck School, are those costs reimbursed?
Yes, they are. Although, again, there is this sort of cap on overall construction costs. So the way it works is essentially the cost per square foot is higher on Peck because the demolition cost is folded in, but they are essentially reimbursing within the cap on the demolition costs, which is one of the reasons I think the mayor had it right, that there is a real advantage to utilizing this funding source to do this project.
And just for the public, so we can get this right out in front on the first day.
Yeah.
Why are the demolition costs so high on Peck?
So, well, I would say it's an early estimate. So remember, I'm always want to, when we give people estimates, I want to have the
You know where
last two
I'm going,
numbers be
Margaret.
zero.
You know where I'm going. Cut to
So
the
it's
chase.
an estimate. But, the core reason is that there's quite a lot of abatement that has to happen. This building is not contaminated in the way the Lynch School is contaminated. It has sort of more typical types of contamination, but you can't demolish a building like this without abating it first. So first you do the abatement, then you do the demolition, and that allows the demolition material to be disposed of more cost effectively.
Correct.
So.
But it's,
And that's one of the reasons when we looked at it as a renovation project, to Joe's earlier question, it's not particularly it's not cost effective at all, partly because there's so much more building than is actually useful. And secondly, you have to do abatement and you have to do the work in phases because you need to kind of not be abating where the kids are, so.
just wanted to get that right out of the
Yep.
starting gate so the public was aware.
Now, I know you've talked a lot about abatement here recently. so. Any other questions?
Anything else for Margaret? Would anyone else like to address the committee? Members of the school committee? John Burnell?
How you doing?
Ward?
John Burnell, Ward 5. And thank you all for showing up. I wish there was more members of the council. And I just think that we really need to go forward with the funding tonight as well. And then also putting this on the ballot, giving the residents of the city to make the decision. We've put CPA on the ballot. We put needle exchange on the ballot. We put other things on the ballot. There's no reason whatsoever not being able to put this on the ballot for an override. I've grown up here my whole life. I had the pleasure of serving on a city council for many years. And Joe, I'll tell you, I'll be brief. That's my favorite saying with Joe when I was on the on the city council.
And it never happened.
Never happened, but I will be. And there's things going on in the city right now with the pot and all that stuff. I don't want Holyoke to be known as the pot city. I want Holyoke to be known as a city where our kids can get great education. And if you want to rekindle the spirit in the city and bring people back here, move back here, then we need to have a great education system. People are moving out of this city in droves because of our educational system. I believe that bringing in and Joe and I talked before the meeting, I think we made a mistake 15, 16 years ago when they went to a K through 8 program. I think we need to bring back the K through 5 and middle schools again to our system. And I believe building, like Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. I do believe that if we build these schools, that we will bring people back into our community. So I would encourage yourselves and talk to your colleagues to not only vote for this, but to put it on the ballot. Give the people the opportunity to vote for it. You can go out and vote against it if you want, and go against it if you want, but give the people the opportunity to vote for that. So I appreciate you listening and appreciate you guys being here tonight. I just would encourage you to make sure you do that.
Thank you, John. Approaching the mic is Devin Sheehan, school committee member at large, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm here not only as a school committee member, but I also have the opportunity to chair the school building committee. And we've been working probably over a year now. And this project that was approved by the MSBA was probably originally approved 6-7 years ago for us to move forward with even this Lawrence project. But we really, as a committee, labored and discussed all of these different points with, should we build one school that fits 1,100 people down at the Lawrence area? I mean, we talked about every different configuration to serve the best interest of our students here in Holyoke, because the real key component when we go for this financing through MSBA is what's best for the education of our students. And then we on the committee have to balance out, well, how do we pay for it? How do we fund it? How do we do all these different things to balance out what's best for the students? And it was not, even with our own small school building committee, a easy decision or a not fully discussed decision to possibly have a vote, possibly ask the council to bond for it without a vote and make that decision. And we really labored over that. And we really labored over 2 school buildings, because there were members of the committee going into it that said, look, we're here for one, let's get one done, and then let's think about another one in 10 years. Let's think about another one in 5 years, whatever it may be. And really coming down to it is thinking, can we really drive the mission of the Holyoke Public Schools and what we're doing to improve the Holyoke Public Schools by just serving 550 students? And being able to do this and kind of take a school and make it a Frankenstein school and retrofit it to be another middle school. And the committee took the report by the MSBA that rated all of our schools pretty poorly to mediocre with some of the conditions of them. And we really said, we need 2 new middle schools for our students. And that's where we said, it's going to be kind of a roll of the dice with the MSBA. They haven't done this. They haven't approved building projects all at once. And somehow, because of the mayor, because of Representative Vega, we kind of got offered this golden ticket and this opportunity to really change and help with the urban renewal plan of the city of Holyoke and everywhere where this city is going and what we're doing. And it's to build 2 brand new middle schools. I mean, that middle school population is one of the hardest populations for teachers to teach. And right now, you've all been in the schools. You see what K-8s are like. You've seen them. You've heard every teacher say this doesn't work. This isn't working. And we really have an opportunity here. And we all have the opportunity to think about a legacy for, like as Councilor Sullivan said, is what is this going to look like in 50 years? And I hope that these 2 new middle schools have the technology and carry us forward so they are the next Holyoke High Schools. They are this beacon of beauty on Beach Street that we can say and be proud of, and that we can have generations of students and parents and grandparents and great-grandparents that walk through the same hallways. And we have that opportunity to really change 2 areas of the city of Holyoke and change the trajectory for some of our students. And I think that is what's key with that. And there's going to be a lot to discuss in the spring. There's going to be a lot to discuss about voting. But right now, just to move forward so the great professionals that we've hired can move forward, and for this $390,000, I think is a great step for the future of the city and where we need to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin.
Yes. Niles Corshane, Ward 7.
Good evening, distinguished gentlemen. I've been on school committee probably only 3 years, and never had a vote on school committee. But I have to say that in the 3 years that I've been on school committee, I've watched this transformation occur, even just looking down my own street at Ian White School and looking at some of the other really bold moves that occurred while my kids were at the high school. And I can tell you that the junior high problem is the problem that the school district faces. It's the question that parents ask themselves beginning in 2nd and 3rd grade. They already ask themselves, what's going to happen at junior high? Is this the right place for us at junior high? And we're making these really great strides, bringing pre-Ks to all the grade schools. Can't do that without these middle schools. It's just physically impossible. And I'm watching it happen, and I think we're going to see the results. It's going to be this wave that comes through from our pre-Ks and then end up in these brand new facilities, and we're going to have students that are better prepared for high school, and then we're going to see some great things happen with our high school as this wave comes through. And I think that we have a really great opportunity that we will not have again if we don't go for the 2 schools. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Niles.
I think I just want to introduce myself. My name's Dory Brooks. I'm an architect with Jones Whitson Architects, 4-year architects for the middle schools projects, and there are 2 of you I haven't met, so I wanted to first say hello, but also make 3 points that I think support some of what you've heard. The first is that I'm also here tonight with David Fontaine Sr. Fontaine Brothers has been selected as a builder for this project. Jones Whitson and Fontaine have had the pleasure of working on 3 previous projects within recent years together, all in the immediate area, all highly successful projects. Plains Elementary in South Hadley is nearby, so for those of you who are questioning the durability and longevity and potential value of these projects, I'd recommend that you take a look at previous projects that we've also done with Fontaine to suggest that you do have, I think, a team that is familiar and consistently working towards long-term successful projects rather than sort of the project that may only have a 6-year lifespan. So we are invested in working on this design process continually. The committee we've been working with has been exceptionally forward-thinking and has consistently talked about the educational importance of the projects, but also the value to the community. And they are making, I think, prudent decisions thus far, and that process will continue. And as we continue through it, I think the value and the appropriateness of the design to this community will become more and more clear as we're able to show more and more of the design process to you as we go forward. So this is a process we're familiar with, where we try very hard to bring enough information to the estimators to establish a good number. It's a continual process of revising that number and clarifying it. Part of what you're being asked to approve tonight is actually so that we can be sure the numbers that we're providing you with at the end of this phase are accurate. And towards that point, I just want to really point out how important it is that we continue to move forward, because there are a lot of things. The appropriation the MSBA made, or the decision occurred at the end of August. So while there are issues around the debt exclusion that you may want to continue to explore, allowing us to continue to explore the true cost of demolition based on the actual material testing we need to do, and the true cost of the soil conditions and that process and how that plays out for the project, rather than just big square footage based numbers, is a really important part of the process, and being sure that the numbers you're given are accurate. So for that reason, I really do hope you can continue to allow us to move forward and give you the numbers you need. Thanks.
Joy, thank you. And if I can just ask a question, did you or your firm and look at the PEC school itself and understand why it cannot be retrofitted?
Yeah, I'd say in addition to the information that you've been given about the complexity of the building in terms of its scale, it is a very large building. I mean, how many potential commercial or educational clients are your most likely client for that building type because of how it's designed. The fact that it's programmatically designed as 2 multi-story octagons makes it a little challenging as well. So it really only serves one particular type of use, and there are I can't think of how many potential users you have who are going to be looking for a building of that scale. It's, I believe, 170,000 square feet. So it's a very large building, and part of why the committee is looking at, there are 2 reasons to look at 2 550 student schools. The most important is the educational importance of having those communities be scaled such that the students are well served by close relationships. But the other is, if you ever needed to repurpose this building, a building of the scale of PEC is so difficult to flip into another use.
So are you saying as an architect, you wouldn't like the challenge of making it residential with a health club in the gym, a movie theater in the auditorium?
The sliver windows and the quality of the materials, the fact that you can hear between rooms so well, I don't think those are going to be advantageous as a housing project at all. No, I don't see many other uses other than educational. Sorry.
Thank you. Councilor Sullivan?
Also, we mentioned, as far as the Lawrence Chestnut Street project, could you just touch for a minute on the environmental concerns there also?
Sure. We've already done a phase 1 and a phase 2 study there. The phase 1 study just looks at the historic record of the site and establishes whether there are any significant environmental concerns that need to be explored further. And 2 were identified. We did that at both sites, actually, in the early phase. Peck is actually, relatively speaking, assumed to be a fairly clean site, soil-wise. Lawrence is an older site. Lawrence Chestnut Block is an older site with a number of buildings, as you're aware of, that have been demolished. And there were 2 major concerns there. One was the possibility of seepage from a remote gas station into the site, and the other is underground tanks. Those were really critical concerns. We addressed those and tested with geoprobes, a magnetometer study, and a 25-foot drill in the phase 2 study, and determined where there was a tank and then had that tank removed. So the tank issue was resolved, and we found no concerns for water that had been contaminated, which would have caused a real significant environmental problems. So those are things that would have been reason to hesitate to move forward. The last reason we're concerned about at that site is just urban fill, the quality of the soil, and whether or not there are things in the soil that might make it difficult to dispose of the soils easily. So we've met recently and been exploring how we're going to move forward on that. And that's one of the things that we'd like to trigger right now is we want to do test pits to explore the nature and characteristics of the soils, so that we can determine whether we are keeping them all on site or whether some of them, if we end up with excess soil after the build, we might need to remove. We're also looking at design processes that will allow us to do a cut and fill as balanced as possible. And we're trying to provide this information and develop a plan that's the most cost-effective plan, because as you know, with hazmat and with soils, there's sort of how you do it is also leads to costs. So we're trying to set up a protocol that's the most appropriate protocol possible so that Fontaine can have the most accurate number in the budget. But we don't, at this point, see anything that would prohibit the project moving forward. We just want to get that number as accurate as possible for you.
No, I don't see anything that would prohibit it from moving forward. I'm just wondering if there's anything that could significantly add to the costs of what we're already looking at, what's before us, what we're talking about bonding.
I mean, the worst case scenario that we've discussed is if we have to take significant amounts of that soil and dispose of it in a very high-end disposal process. That's the number, that's the top number that we might want to hold. We have a fairly high number in the budget already, but by exploring and studying the characteristics and revising the design, we're able to bring that number down, and that's the process that we're kind of going through in the SD phase, is we put sort of big numbers and then we work through that. And typically we see our cost estimate, go down as we're able to answer all of those questions.
And that leads into my final one. Regarding the Plain School and some of the other projects, that came in on time and under budget?
Yes, it did. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, so the specific of the budget, but pretty much on time and under budget is my understanding. Fontaine may recall more specifically. It's been done for a while, but. And in general, Jones Whitson's projects, in the grand scheme of the state's numbers, our projects are cost effective. We tend to be in the bottom 1/3 of cost per square foot within the state. We don't want to be at the bottom, to be honest. It's just part of it is our market, part of it is the thoughtfulness of how we go about it, and our relationship with the builders and the details of our drawings. But I think what we find is that the cost estimators early on are just sort of assuming the same thing on every project. And it's as you're able to put detail into it that they get more resolved with some of their numbers. So we hope to see that improve.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor, there's one additional, I don't know if it'll be a cost to the project, but certainly a cost to the city, and that's we don't fully own or control the land we're talking about. What's our next plan there?
Yeah, so we had some preliminary discussions when it was wrapped up in the Monte Della Rosa negotiation purchase, and so our plan is to submit a proposal to the council absent without the consideration of the purchase of MD, and so that's what we plan to do in the near future. I know MSBA and the team is eager to make sure that the city has site control or a path to site control in the near future.
And the bishop is willing to turn the land over for $1 considering all the school busing that we paid for over the years.
I haven't heard that yet, but
We're just planting a little seed.
I know you are, yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, considering what may be in the ground on his property.
Yeah, I mean, based on what Dory said, it seems like that we've made it through phase 1 and phase 2, and the only question now is sort of the quality of the soil and whether or not it needs to be removed, so.
I can tell you from the history of Holyoke and from the fires and how demolitions were handled in those days. I'll tell you right now, they're sitting on a contaminated piece of property, and we shouldn't pay them more than $1. They should pay us to take it.
I will say, we're in the process of doing an appraisal, so we're waiting for the official appraisal to get back before we submit new orders before the city council. The price that we had proposed to the council before was essentially the asking price from the diocese, and so the appraisal, maybe the asking price and maybe less, but that'll dictate sort of what my request is to the council in terms of the consideration there.
Well,
And I sense that it would be a similar agreement to, similar agreement with the housing authority as we had before.
we're
open
willing
to
to also
discussion.
entertain what they'd be willing to pay us to take it off their hands.
Anyone else? If I could just say, I for one am convinced that
Dr. Schreck?
I'm sorry, Dr. Zeiger.
Yes, thank you for listening to us tonight, and I'll be brief. You've heard from me enough. I just have 3 points to make. The first is, I didn't come to Holyoke thinking that the middle schools are better than K-8 schools. But what I quickly learned here is that it hasn't worked in Holyoke. The K-8 model hasn't worked. And the feedback from the moment I arrived has been universal. And when I first met with the school committee, they probably didn't want to meet with me the first time, but one of the first things they may not still want to meet with me, but from the moment I arrived, this is one thing that I heard from the committee members is, we need to move away from the K-8 model. And then throughout my conversations in my first year, the same thing was repeated by parents, by community leaders, and then by our staff. I mean, teachers, almost to a person, feel strongly that it hasn't worked. And a lot of it has to do with the scale, and we're running very small middle schools, which, to what Niles mentioned, we're not providing kids with what they deserve at the middle school level. I can say that with certainty, and I think that's been a real challenge for the system, and that's a big gaping hole in our schools. I'm not that we're perfect everywhere else, but I have the greatest concerns about our middle school grades. And so I do think that this is really responsive to the community. This is not Dr. Zreich's idea. I think it's and for other communities, it might not be the right thing. But for this community and what it needs and what its children need, I have no doubt that for the future, looking forward, this makes a lot of sense for educational outcomes. Second thing I'll say is our facilities are not in good shape. And I have had the advantage of working in other systems, and I certainly visit schools. I have great concerns about and it's not because we have great facilities folks that have done a lot to try to update our systems, our facilities. But we have an opportunity right now with the renovations at Kelly, Sullivan, and Morgan with windows and doors, as well as building 2 middle schools, to completely transform this portfolio of schools for the next 50 years and put us in a very strong position in terms of our facilities. It also provides the option, which I think cannot be underestimated, of us getting out of more buildings. We're running too many schools for the number of students we serve. We run 11 buildings. In truth, it would be we'd get out of 3 buildings. The way we've designed this, we'd actually be running 8 buildings with the 2 middle schools. The reason that the number we've talked about too is we'd repurpose one of the existing buildings to be an early childhood center to serve more children in pre-K, which I think I've shared with this community many times. It's a very important interest of mine, is expand pre-K. But that's new students coming to the Holyoke Public Schools. So it's not, but for our existing number of kids, we really should be only running, in my opinion, 8 buildings. And so there's a tremendous amount of efficiency that does not necessarily go back to the city, because it is Chapter $70, but it allows you know, hopefully we'll get the funding formula fixed for those of us that were there last night for the meeting. But it does allow more of the resources to go back to programs for kids and enrichment, investment in our teachers, more investment in supplies, curriculum, all those things. We are spending way too much for the number of kids that we have very small schools in too many buildings. I mean, when you look at Metcalf, you look at Lawrence, they're tiny schools serving 250 to 300 students. It would be a significant shot in the arm in terms of money going back to what we know needs to happen in our schools, providing the arts and the other experiences that kids deserve to have. I do think it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity for this city. I say that, I'm saying that not, again, I think receivership or not, this is the kind of investment that this city needs to change the course of its educational experience for kids for many, many years to come. And I don't know that, and the other thing I just challenge folks to do, and I think we need to organize this, is let's visit some schools, some brand new schools around the state. We don't have to go that far. We can go to some of our neighbors. For those of you that have been to some of those schools, it would absolutely revolutionize. Holyoke High is a great space, but it's still not state of the art. It's not a state of the art high school, and to have 2 state of the art middle schools would certainly put the city ahead, and our kids deserve that as much as anybody else. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate the time tonight.
Thank you, Doctor. And I wasn't going to say this, but thank you for opening the window, because John Burnell mentioned that we were talking before the meeting, and we talked about this 16, 17 years ago when we went to the K-8 model. Of course, some of us were around 20 years before that when we got away from the K-8 model for all the right reasons. And John didn't blame the school committee, he blamed Dr. Carballo. And the one thing Dr. Carballo did say, and John and I agree, during the only one thing I think we agreed with him, and the one thing we always thought was correct is we need more slots for preschool. And somewhere down the road, we have to do that. And I think that will open up a lot of windows and doors for our parents and strengthen the public school system itself. So you may say this is not just you speaking this evening, Steve, but you're going to have ownership one way or the other when this is all said and done. So no problem. Anything else?
Joe.
Councilor McGee.
Yeah, I'd like to get a little more information on the Lawrence Chestnut. I know we just kind of touched on it, but when are we going to have an overall announcement as to whether or not we can buy that land or take control of it? What's the timetable?
I would hope within the next month we'd have clarity on that.
Because
So-
I do believe you pointed out February 2019, we have to have everything in order to go, correct?
Yeah, just a couple things about the overall schedule. So, as I mentioned earlier, the MSBA took this vote on our feasibility phase on August 29th. Now we will make a submittal on February 19th to them, which will provide further detail and a much deeper dive on the estimate, as well as closing the loop on issues like site control. So the MSBA will be looking by February 19th or shortly thereafter for this information, and then they will be voting in mid-April on the proposed project. So at that point, we would have an agreement about the funding. We would have the funding agreement in place. The deal, basically. So.
All right, so, I mean, I understand, we've already entered into putting money forward to study the site. Now we're asking for money for the Peck school area. Peck we own, we control it, we can do whatever we want, we can tear it down, build a new school, so that makes sense. That one we've been studying, we don't control it yet. They come back, worst case scenario, and we just don't like their deal like last time. Didn't like it at all, got one vote. What happens? Are we now forcing our hand to accept whatever they want? Or, I mean, here's another 78,000 that we're committing to this. And it turns out, diocese sees that and they say, well, you need it, price goes up. I say, no, you should just give it to us because it's educating our kids, and that's what you're here for as well. They say, no, we want X. We say no back. Are we causing trouble with the timetable? Are we positioning ourselves into taking land at a price that we shouldn't pay more than what we should?
So
Well,
I'm going to let the mayor respond to that.
yeah.
I just want to clarify that the 78,000 is the city's share of the 390.
Yep.
And most of the 390 is going to Jones Whitsett to do the schematic design for the PEC site. And a fraction of that, 20,000, is for further exploration of the Chestnut site.
Still money going towards it.
Yeah.
Which really, I'll be clear on the architecture. I couldn't praise you enough. I met you down at Dean Tech when you guys first came in. I got to see you and you said file an order to get in front of Joe. And I found out what you did over in South Hadley and I almost sold. We still got a budget issue to deal with. The work that was done in South Hadley is, I can't praise it enough, it's phenomenal. That's what Holyoke needs. And if we can get two of those, you know, good for us. The real problem is we don't control one of those sites. Like I said, PEC's easy, it's ours. This spot, I want a firm commitment as to, I know in a month they're gonna come down. Well, I commit another 78,000. I know it's 390, but a reimbursement, 78,000. It's another pool of money we're throwing at this thing, and we don't control it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and the team shares your concern. Obviously, it's a central point of the project. It's something we discuss often, and you know, in the interest of transparency, obviously we brought this up, you know, months ago in the spring around the negotiations with Monte Della Rosa, and so I'm confident we can get this done before the deadline in February. In terms of, you know, I discussed that we're doing an appraisal. So the city or city agencies have about 80% ownership of the actual block, right? And so worst case scenario, which I don't think we'll have to pursue, is taking it by eminent domain for a public purpose, which we will certainly have the legal right to do if we want to get there. And that will be based on an actual calculation where the diocese will be unable to extort the city for more money than is necessary based on our planning process. So we don't think we'll get to that point based on our conversation with the diocese, but as I said before, they were asking, I don't know, what was it, 120 or 140 for it. That was their asking price before, and so those negotiations were separate because they were tied to MD. And so both parties agreed, well, let's do an appraisal, see what the number is, and then submit an appropriate number to the council. It could be less. I mean, we want to pay as less as possible for that property. And as you remember when we were talking about MD, in the interest of the city not, you know, having to use cash to purchase it right away, we had worked out a potential scenario with the housing authority that they would purchase it with assets that they have. And then the city has up to 5 years to do it. I mean, we have different scenarios to get there, but I'm confident in the very near future we'll have more information at the council so we can get towards site control.
Yeah, I'm glad you said eminent domain. That's one of the paths I choose for that spot if push comes to shove. I don't think we need to take the MD Church and start complicating this matter with the schools.
I agree, and it's going to be separate.
Separate it. If the group, and I've talked to Mike about this, wants to purchase it, MD was going to be sold for $50,000 on our end.
Yeah.
Have that group give up the $50,000, have them deal with the church separate from us.
Yeah, and that message was given to us loud and clear, as you know, so they'll be completely separate.
Because for me, the other thing I would like to point out is with PEC schools, you have that dingle, of which do the designs I know some of it shows the taking of the dingle or clearing it. Is there parking for there? Was that ever discussed as part of the project?
So there has been discussion separate from us, between the city, I think, and the hospital about the hospital's needs for parking.
That's
You're
where I'm
probably
going with it.
referencing that.
Yep.
Nothing, to my knowledge, has gone beyond conversation on that, and it has not impacted the project. And it seemed highly unlikely that it would. I think there have been discussions that they need parking in general. Early on, there's a thought of, well, maybe they would take the whole school and that would solve your demo problems altogether. But that did not evolve as a conversation. The plans we're showing, so at the recommendation of the planning department, they have asked that we try and explore in our design thinking how you could improve the dingle. So we have shown and continue to show the dingle opened up and show paths through it. The question for us will be, where's the line of the project and what is the city long-term goals to improve the dingle? Simply because we don't want this project to necessarily, go massively over budget trying to fix a sort of unrelated issue. But we do feel strongly that the dingle is important to the school because part of the school's lack of success, I think, has to do with the fact that the dingle is, an unpleasant feature that was not addressed by the architects who built Peck in the first place.
So
we
on
hope to
that
see it
point,
improved.
within your schematic there, is the taking currently of the dingle for parking or just for opening up the space?
Just for opening up the space, just for improving it as the natural amenity that it is. So there's currently a very limited deed notation that the city attorney's having removed with the hospital that originally in the 80s, I imagine, or 70s, put the idea that the dingle would serve as a buffer between the hospital and the new school. And that remained on the books, and we found it when we did title searches. The hospital has no problem with taking it. The problem of that restriction is that meant nobody touched the woods. And by not touching the woods, they didn't manage the woods grew thicker and darker. So we're asking for that restriction to be lifted so that as a part of the project, we can improve the dingle, we can illuminate the area, we can put paths in there, we can put outdoor classrooms to the edge of the school and make it a healthier part of the site plan.
The reason I bring it up is because we have traffic flow problems. McIntosh, is that the side street there?
Right.
For parking, for use of the field and everything else. Could pushing parking down to there to allow people to walk up the hill or whatever, as well as going to the hospital, this would be for the mayor, saying, and I've spoke with people at the hospital, they're looking for parking. Could they purchase a portion of it to then have parking down there, which then helps with an offset? It won't be a huge number, but we're looking for every dollar we can find. Can that all be incorporated in some way that the hospital gets a portion for parking, stairway, whatever else they need to get to the, and then for us, whether it's parking or open space, to deal with the parking issue up on McIntosh. In essence, looking at the full view of the project.
I think it's a great idea to have a full view look at things. And I think that the city will probably want to do that. I've heard discussion about looking at the fact that we're looking at the school has opened up that question about, well, what about the upper part of the dingle? The area immediately adjacent to the school, I would just generally say, having spent a lot of time exploring the dingle on foot, it's not a very easy way. You would not get a lot of parking at the bottom that would justify the expenditure on the part of the hospital to put parking there to then get up from there to the fields or to the hospital. It's a very steep climb for a very small number of parking spaces. So I don't see that as being likely. It would take a significant structure, say at the end of the dingle, to provide layers of parking, and even that I think is a pretty tough possibility, but I think it's something the hospital potentially might explore. What we have done in our site planning and what we intend to do more of is explored ways to make more parking visible and accessible to the field, Crozier, so that right now, if you're using McIntosh Terrace and parking there to play baseball, you don't know that there's a wealth of parking right around the corner. It's not clear. And there's a lot of empty parking associated with the Peck School. So in the process of redesigning the flow and circulation, we hope to make it a little bit more clear so that people won't use McIntosh Terrace. And we haven't etched those plans in concrete yet. We hope to have a conversation actually with the neighborhood about ways they can imagine us improving the site plan so that we improve circulation and parking. And we're looking at ways to bring an extra access road through the high school's parking area up, so that we take some of the pressure off of McIntosh and some of the smaller residential streets that feed Peck to improve it, because it does have issues. And we're also, as a part of the allocation that you're going to make, the appropriation, we're able to fund a full traffic study surrounding the school district, which will help not only that project, but probably other public issues in the area.
And finally would be something that we have worked on, and I know superintendent's help with cost cutting, which would be moving 57 Suffolk Street. I know it has nothing to do with the two schools, but in essence, in a full view, it has everything to do with it, which then would be is if we get the property by Lawrence, or we shut down Medcath and move the kids to whatever school they're gonna go to. Is there a way to move the school department to one of those buildings? I know we don't get reimbursement, part of the 80% for that, but I think tying all that together as one big plan is a better way to sell it to the city than to say, here's 2 new schools. This is everything. It's a global view of moving the school department, dealing with the traffic issues within a certain part of the city, helping the hospital, and getting the 2 schools. If we can do all of that, I think you have a better overall plan for citizens.
Either one of those locations would be ideal for the school department, either Lawrence or Metcalf. We could easily use, and this dates back to when I first started about the cost. It's crazy that we still lease that space, but we didn't have any alternatives. We would have that alternative with the new buildings. We'd get out of the smaller buildings that would be a perfect size for what we need at the central office. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Whitney, but I think we've eyed Lawrence and Metcalf as 2 good locations for the central office. So it should be tied, and I don't see any reason why that move couldn't be made. Would you have any reservations about that, Whitney? Or?
No, not at all. In fact, Whitney Anderson, maintenance administrator, Lawrence School had a study done by Tim Murphy a number of years ago, but for that particular purpose, at a time when it was going to be used with the transitional school. And at that time, it was viable and feasible. And I'm sure Metcalf would offer the same alternatives.
Well, so with that, taking it to the next step, we're saying we need to go to the taxpayer and ask them for help to help fund it. Is the move going to be incorporated into that, or we're just going to say, no, this is just for the 2 middle schools? We'll address that afterwards, which then really is, we all know the facts. Well, that's going to cost $3 million to update Lawrence or Medcalf. They're sorry we don't have it right now, so we're not going to move. Been down that road. That's why I want to tie it all together and say, if you vote for the 2 new schools, this is everything that's going to happen. Parking for the hospital, if that does happen, or we sell land to the hospital. Parking on McIntosh, wherever. Moving 57 Suffolk Street, so we're not paying rent anymore. Going into this spot, that's it. There's the big package.
Good point.
That's what I want.
Oh, it needs to be a conclusive and a encompassing package in that regard.
That's what I want. I understand this. I'll vote for this tonight. I have no problem. But the next vote, I want the package. That's what I'm looking for, because that's what I have to go back to the voters for.
And I would say to that, Counselor, that really relies on I would trust the judgment of the superintendent. So if the superintendent is publicly saying that that is the intention, it wouldn't obviously wouldn't be on the ballot. So we're not voting for the move of the central office. We're voting to authorize, the city to bond for 2 brand new middle schools in these locations. It wouldn't say that, but I totally get your point. If the superintendent is committed to saying, yes, if this happens, then based on his expertise and judgment of what the school office needs to look like, then it'd really be up to him.
Yeah, I think we need to factor those costs in. I don't know, I'm not sure, having never done that before, if that can be rolled into the package.
I don't think it can be rolled into the bond, no. But knowing that we're going from 11 schools to 8 schools, the overall savings that we're going to see.
The city might also want to do we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. We may also do a calculation. How much a year are we paying in rent now with 2 floors? You already consolidated from 4 to 2.
About 150.
150. And so is there a scenario where the city could redevelop Metcalf and Lawrence into housing projects, and we're getting more than the cost of we're paying for rent, right? So I think it's too premature to make a decision that there's two separate issues, right? We may want to put Metcalf out to RFP for housing or another office use. There may be other scenarios or factors, and so it may be a talking point that there's openness or it will provide a well-sized building for this purpose. But we also may, as a team, make different, as a council and as an administration, may think, well, should we declare them surplus and do something else? So I just don't want to get boxed into that extent.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that I would present options to the community because I think it's important that you keep the focus on the thing that you know you're doing, choices that it gives you. I've definitely seen projects kind of go sideways around something that one person thinks is a great idea and the next person doesn't. But I think giving a sense of the range of options that it opens up to improve the operations of the district and to be cost effective.
I was hoping to retire to Metcalf School, Mayor, but I think it's a great idea. Whitney, while you're there, real quick, back when Mike Sullivan was still mayor, when we did the science wing at the high school, we originally had a more than just a science wing and the air conditioning and something else. But we had part of that original proposal was the Dingo becoming both an access road, Joy, with a connection to the intersection at the hospital. We actually, at Mike's urging, had a practice soccer field and more parking for the high school. Are those plans still around? Because I don't know how far they went, but.
I think it was just conceptual, and the notion was actually to fill a portion of it.
Yeah, to fill it.
Yeah, to be able to get the road to go up to Beach Street level. Yeah. Didn't go that far. It was a good conceptual idea, right? Yeah. All right. I think we've gone pretty far here. Anything else from the committee? Are we prepared to make a motion on this item?
Motion to approve. Yeah, a second.
Motion made and second to approve an item of $390,000 to refer this recommendation to the full city council next week. This would be for the purpose of expanding or doing the schematic design for the Peck School, and also for the purpose of expanding the 2 middle school and agreeing to the 2 middle school concept and proposal. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. We will be doing this next Tuesday in front of the full city council. We will bring all the words of wisdoms that we heard this evening. You're welcome, if you live around here, to watch us on TV or stop down. And if not, we will communicate the vote to everyone as quickly as possible.
You can also watch online from anywhere in the world.
And yes, that's what we get when we hire younger people for mayors. They understand this social media stuff far better than I have to call my daughters. But Mayor, thank you, and thank you everyone for participating this evening, and thank you especially to the members of the school committee, because I think our future is what we're discussing, and the future only begins with the kids and their education. And I hope we can make the funding stuff work, and I hope what we heard last night we can make work too, which is probably even more important with the Chapter 70 dollars. We still have business, but thank you everybody. If you want to have your own conversations, get out in the hallway and not too loud.
Thank you.
Thanks. Todd, we didn't get too far, but 8, 9, and 10, at this point in time, I think if everybody's comfortable, we can just say are now complied with.
Yeah, so 7 was passed,
Yep.
8, 9, and 10 is just complied with.
A motion that items 8, 9, and 10, the communication from the mayor in the middle schools, the communication from the mayor in a letter to Jack McCarthy, Executive Director of MSBA, and Councilor McGee's order to bring in Councilor Brown Martinez to bring in Margaret Woods is now recommended that we tell the city council these items have been complied with. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. If we can try and do this, and if anybody, if there's nothing on the rest of the agenda that we have to do this evening, but I think I can put a couple things in perspective where we might want to do it. Item number 1 is a transfer from electrical inspector of $4,000 to electrical inspections of $4,000. Motion to take off the table for discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? Damien had a family conflict of interest this evening, And I did take the time to speak with him because I kind of read into what this might be, and it is exactly what I thought, the same thing we did with the plumbing inspections about a month ago. Our electrical inspector, during the course of this fiscal year, budget-wise, Tom Sullivan, has left the city. That leaves that position open. They are in the attempt of hiring and backfilling that position. Currently, there is excess money in that line item because of the position is not occupied. Electrical inspections, Damien reminded me, because I did forget, electrical inspections, we do have an alternate electrical inspector. His name is Tom Leahy. He's been doing it for forever. However, Tom is an alternate, and he does it per diem as needed. Damien's trying to keep as tight a lid on that as possible, but the current month he owes Mr. Leahy, if I'm saying it correctly, about $4,000. So he's asking to transfer it from the obvious line item of the unfilled position to pay Mr. Leahy.
Motion to approve.
Motion made, second to approve, recommend the full city council next Tuesday. All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. All right, items 2, 3, and 4. If we can take items 2 and 4 together.
2 and 4, make a motion to take up 2 and 4 as a package.
All those in favor? Any opposed? This, and I'm not sure if we want to, I'm somewhat comfortable, but I'm not sure if we're ready to vote on this evening. But just so I can fill everybody in, when we contacted, with Brian being out last week, I made the phone calls to the people I thought we needed. I found out from Chief Pond that he wasn't fully aware of what each of these items were, these next 3 items. So I called our auditor, Bellamy, who said, he put the money together, the money is there, but he couldn't offer much of an explanation. He referred me to the law department. I got a hold of Paul Pear this evening before the meeting, and he kind of filled in the blanks. And I think part of the problem, and I think there might be some rewording necessary for these 2 items, but let me explain. Items 2 and 3, the transfers, which is firefighters, item 2, $11,245.07 into each of these accounts, divided deputy chiefs, captains, and lieutenants, was a miscalculation of the collective bargaining agreement that was picked up by the administrator in the fire department sometime this year. What I wasn't able to find out is how far back, if it's only this year or if it goes back into a prior fiscal year. And I could not get that answer for the committee this evening. It's the same thing for item number 4, just a different amount that goes from the alarm officers, $1,097.46, into supervisor alarms and assistant supervisor alarms. It's the same issue.
Well,
go ahead.
Joe, what was the number, when we approved the contract, we took from somewhere to pay deputy chiefs, captains, and lieutenants? What was that number?
It's a very similar number, Councilor McGee, and that's where I was hoping someone was going to show up this evening, and I think the confusion, left us in the dark. The city solicitor is in meetings in his office right now. If we had to, we could bring him up. I'm sorry, that'll be for the next item. For this item, we need either the chief, the deputy chief, or Dale from the office to explain it in more detail. I mean, if there's questions beyond what I can answer, we can try to get the answers before next week, or we can wait 2 weeks to do this. But this would be monies that is owed to each of these categories. And as you can see, the deputy chief's contract is separate from the captains and lieutenants these days. So this is a prior contract. And for some reason, and I don't know if it has something to do with the way they changed their shifts and they just didn't calculate correctly, but that's the gist of the answer I've been given so far. I'm comfortable with laying it on a table or.
Well, I mean, we approved the contracts. I mean, the
Yes.
bad part is, if they said that approving the contract only costs us 11,000 as an add-on, now they're coming back saying it's another 11, so it was 22 total. That's different from what the committee was told. That's an issue. But, calculation mistakes happen. I mean, it is part of the contract. The motion would appropriately be to approve pending an answer to why it was off by half, would be my question.
I have that same question, Councilor McGee, and I think that's important to be able to give those answers to the full city council. I mean, I could, get a hold of Dale or even have Dale come in next week, and I'm sure we can get the answers, or we can wait 2 weeks and be able to do it in early November.
I'll do whatever the committee wants, we can lay it on the table.
Is there any other thoughts?
Is it possible to pass it with finding out if have they come in by Tuesday night?
We can try that, yes. And we can always table it if we don't get the answers for Tuesday night.
Right.
But I want to do what the committee's comfortable with.
Make a motion to approve pending updated info.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? This is on both items. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item 3 and item 5 go together. Motion to take off the table for discussion. Item 3 is the request is a transfer of $14,396.03 from firefighters to lieutenants. This is, and just while we are discussing, item 5 is an appropriation amount of $5,633.52. This would be in the city solicitor's litigation account, and $275 from the litigation appropriation from fiscal year 2019 for services rendered in 2018. This is related to the item that we're discussing for the transfer, and I'll explain both of them. This I got from Paul Pear, who again is in his office now, or should be still in his office in meetings. He said if necessary, if we text him, I can get him over here. But if I can just bring everybody back, I think we're publicly, this is, well covered. But with the issue pertaining to he was a lieutenant, Chad, I lost it. Cunningham, thank you. Being demoted from lieutenant to firefighter, Chad, as a member of the union, filed a grievance. That grievance went to arbitration. The result of the arbitration was that Mr. Cunningham was reinstated to lieutenant. The amount we see here is the base salary that the lieutenant is owed from the time that he was demoted to the firefighter. It's the difference. And this is what is owed to him because of arbitration. The arbitration took place. The city had a different point of view, but the arbiter ruled in Mr. Cunningham's favor. So this is back pay. Note that there is still arbitration going on. Mr. Cunningham is arguing that he was denied his rights to overtime as a lieutenant while he was, but that has not yet been determined by the arbitrator. This is just the base pay itself. By transferring this, I think we have a legal obligation to meet the arbitrator's decision one way or the other, but by transferring this, we're taking the money from an account that has the surplus that's been signed off by the auditor to the lieutenants to make up the base pay. Any thoughts, any discussion?
I have questions for legal on this. I mean, this is a settlement. Is it 14,369 and 5,633 all going to Chad?
Nope, I'm sorry. Let me explain. Item number 5 is related. Item number 5 is $5,633 from one account, 52 cents, and $275. This is, and maybe we should have kept it separate, Todd, I'm sorry. But this is, and we do have the bill for this. This is the cost of arbitration for what we're talking about with Lieutenant Cunningham and what happened with the arbitrator. Any arbitration, the union and the city, regardless of the outcome of the arbitration, split the bill in half. So this is half the bill. This amount before us is what the city owes for the arbitrator's cost, and I talked to Paul, he emailed me, but when I got here this evening, I realized we have both the invoice and the arbitrator's bill. The arbitrator is Mary Ellen Shea. This is a bill that was submitted, and this was, just so you know, what we're also voting on, was submitted late last year, and when it's a fiscal 2018 bill, but it was actually submitted too late to be encumbered and into 2019. So they're both asking us to pay the bill, but also to pay it with this year's funds. The number of hearing days were 3 at $1,400, April 3rd, May 25th, June 1st. Study writings, she billed 5 days at $1,400 for $7,000, which totals $11,200. Expenses includes mileage, 3 trips, which total $67.04. And the city, again, that would be $11,267.04. Dividing it in half, our half is $5,623.52. The $275 is a separate bill, which was, just want to make sure I got it right, but I believe it was the, I'm sorry. I should have read what he wrote me in his email instead of this. This is the American Arbitration Associates Bill of 275, and this involved the DPW. It's the bill of the arbiter. It doesn't explain that arbitration itself. But that's, no, this separate item is not going to Mr. Cunningham. This is just, again, and there's a copy of the bill.
Do you have the 14,369 one order?
Yes. It doesn't. That's just our internal request from I think the department, and to the signature or sign off of the auditor, to the signature and sign off of the mayor, to put it under my name in front of us.
So the full 14,369 is going to Cunningham as a settlement.
That's base pay. After the arbitration was settled, the determination was he was to be returned from firefighter to lieutenant, and that his salary when he was demoted to firefighter was to be reimbursed at the lieutenant's salary. So that's the difference of the base pay from a firefighter to a lieutenant.
No other monies from there are going to any of the other positions? It's all going to Cunningham?
Correct.
So,
That's what I want from legal. I want that answer.
so
Okay, go ahead.
we, together, the union and the city, paid an arbitrator $11,500. $11,500 to come up with a $14,000 settlement. That's what I'm reading here.
That is what's being submitted to us, yes.
That's ridiculous. I don't see any other way to describe it. We paid $11,000 to come up with a $14,000 settlement.
Yeah, I have a question on this one. On both, actually, for the settlement cost and a pending issue on it. That I'll wait till legal comes and I'll ask my question.
Okay.
Because we won't.
I think they might have just sent you.
No, it was, no, it wasn't. Looking at the time and understanding good points, good questions, and probably will lead to more questions, I would suggest that we keep this for our next regular scheduled meeting. And again, I only found out what this was even about this evening, even though I've been attempting for, since our city council meeting to get answers. Ryan, no more vacations.
I'm not gonna say, Ryan, no more vacations. I'm gonna say legal knows these orders are here. They filed these orders. They should be coming to address these questions. That's what I'm saying. They know this was on the agenda. Make a motion to table 3 and 5 until legal shows up. That'd be my motion.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. All right. Anybody know where we are? One's done, two's done, three's done, four's done. Gentlemen, we are done.
Next meeting, schedule?
Still the regular scheduled meeting, which is every other Wednesday, so we are, and we already got some items, but we have additional items that are coming in because we know because of late filed. So it's October 26th. I think that's still working out for everybody.
24th, you mean?
20, hang on,
The
that's why I'm
Wednesday, right?
looking. You said 26. 24th. October 24th, 6:30.
Motion adjourned?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.